Hello, this is Elisel Rodriguez, and we are looking at Dr. Michael Hieser's speech, lecture on the Jewish Trinity. We've gone through the first half of it, and we're going to go through the rest, looking at and deciphering what Dr. Hieser is saying and showing you how he's trying to prove the doctrine of the Trinity when in reality all he's doing is proving Arianism. There is no consubstantiality or proof of consubstantiality in what he's teaching. He's just teaching Arianism. So I want to look at that and get to fully understanding this.
Okay, well, let's jump in here. We'll hit Psalm 82 a little bit. For the rest of tonight, I want to sort of focus on 2 points, or have these 2 points in your mind. One is, again, that Yahweh, while Yahweh is an Elohim and no other Elohim or Yahweh, that means Yahweh is inherently superior. He is in command. He is ontologically, fancy theological word there. Ontology means what a thing is. He, by definition, is superior to anything else in the spiritual world. And of course.
Okay, so he's saying 2 points that he wants to make is that Yahweh is in command of all other Elohim, and that he is superior and unique, that ontologically he is superior, he's different, and that he's the only one, or that Yahweh is the only one. But his concept also involves Jesus being called God, but not in the same sense. So he's saying Jesus is called God in not another sense, so that the Jews can start to kind of inch their way towards the Trinity. We needed to use their own Jewishness, their own Jewish theology on, the plurality of divine beings, use that to get Jews to believe that Jesus can be called God in a lesser sense, and then try to get them eventually to believe in the doctrine of the Trinity by showing them stuff that they already believe. So, but when you gather that information and say that the Father is the only God and that he's ontologically different from Jesus, because the only point that he's brought the Jews to so far is that Jesus is a different kind of God. He's a different God than the Father, than Yahweh. And so Yahweh is one God and Jesus is a different God. They're not the same kind. They're not the same level. They're not the same everything. So when he's talking about Yahweh is in command of other Elohim, the other Elohim that he's in command of is Jesus as well, because this is the point that he's brought them to. He hasn't brought them to the point of where they believe that there's a Trinity and that they're consubstantial. He's only brought them to the point he's only proven the point that Jesus should be called a God in a different sense. That's still Arianism. That is essentially Arianism. And so just keep in mind that this is going to stay in Arianism. He's not going to ever get to the point where he's teaching with convincingly teaching that it's a consubstantiality in Judaism among the Jewish ideas.
So that's one thought to keep in the back of our minds. The other one is this sonship language that you will see associated with certain Elohim in the spiritual world gets rightly applied to divine beings because God created all those other divine beings, not only humans, without threatening monotheism. So the first hurdle you have to sort of cross is this idea of again, especially if you have someone who's like a Jewish person really devoted to the Old Testament and the Shema, it's like I shouldn't even be using phrases like plural gods or plural Elohim because God's going to strike me down because the Lord our God is one. That's a hurdle we can get over. Now, let's talk about, since divine plurality doesn't interfere with monotheism, let's talk about this divine Son idea, because to a Jew, who is the Son of God to a Jew? There are 2 candidates in the Old Testament. This is like Old Testament Final Jeopardy here. Okay. Who is the Son of God in the Old Testament? Who gets called my son? Israel. Hosea 11:1. Out of Egypt I have called my son. Okay, referring back to the Exodus. Who else? The other passage for that is when Moses and Aaron go before Pharaoh and they request to have permission to leave Egypt. Thus says the Lord, let my people go so that my son can go out in the desert and worship me. Again, it's a corporate reference. But what's the other candidate? Who does God call my son? The king. The Israelite king. Okay, there's some psalms to that effect. So if you're a Jew, and you know your Old Testament, you're thinking, oh, okay, all this divine son stuff, I don't know about that, because I get the divine plurality thing, but Jesus is saying he's the Son of God. He's not Israel, and he's not the king. He's just this carpenter guy. So I don't know if I can buy that. That seems to contradict this whole, divine plurality thing that Jesus could be, divine. Well, no, it doesn't, because we have passages like Psalm 82 where the same language is applied to these beings.
So let me just point out that what Michael Hieser, Dr. Hieser, is wanting to do is to find a way to be convincing to Jews to fool them into believing in the doctrine of the Trinity. That is his aim. And so step one was to show how other beings can be called God and how Jesus can be called God by virtue of the fact that other beings can be called God, and that Jews can accept that somehow in their already known Jewish propensities of believing things like the Memra and the Logos and the wisdom of God and the Metatron and these other Jewish concepts of how the word God can be used, and realizing that that's how they want to use that for Jesus. That's Arianism. And so he's going to he's literally trying to find a way to get Jews to believe the doctrine of the Trinity. That is his whole aim here. This is the strategy. And so when he gets to this point, when he's trying to get to help Jews believe via the Old Testament only that Jesus is the Son of God, through this, he's saying, look, I need to go to this scripture here where it talks about the divine counsel, and I'm going to use this to prove that there are other sons of God in the kingdom of God or in heaven, that angels are essentially called sons of God, and therefore they're called God, because it says ye are gods, and it can't be humans. When he admitted earlier that scholars largely agree that it's talking about humans. And the reason he's trying to change it and misread the text here into being angels is because he's trying to find good enough reasons to fool Jews into believing the doctrine of the Trinity. That's his aim. And so he's literally going to read this psalm in a different way, because that's that old adage. How does it go? The end justifies the means. In which case, because I'm trying to do a good thing, like teach Jews the doctrine of the Trinity, it's okay if I misunderstand or misinterpret or misrepresent these scriptures, because it's a lofty goal to teach Jews to believe the doctrine of the Trinity, and so God is going to honor that regardless of if I have to misread this or take it in a different way or go off a deep end with it. So that's how I'm seeing him in his strategy in this area. I don't agree that Psalms 82 is talking about humans. I'm sorry, that it's talking about angels. I think it's talking about humans.
Yeah, these are just baby steps, to get a Jewish person to think about divine plurality from their own Bible without use of the New Testament. God has taken his place in the divine council. You know, you have, or you see, you have God in blue here. The column here in blue, we have Elohim is the term. This is singular. This is a good translation. This is the ESV. We know it's singular because the verb it goes with, taking his place, is singular. Nitzav is a singular participle. I mention that because Elohim as a word is what grammarians call morphologically plural. That is, the shape, the spelling of the word is plural. If you know a little bit of Hebrew, you know that words, nouns that end in im are plural. Elohim, plural. Okay, so the shape of the word is plural. But in most cases throughout the whole Old Testament, the meaning of the term is actually singular. You say, well, how do you know, Mike? You're just saying that because you want to say that, you know, and blah, 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 blah. No, actually, there's this thing we call grammar. And I know it's boring, but it's really useful on occasion. Elohim is actually a word like in English, deer, D-E-E-R, or sheep. Okay, if I walked up to you and said, sheep, more than one or just one? You're like, other than thinking, who is this crazy man? You're thinking, oh, I don't know. It's just a word. Put it in a sentence. If I say the sheep is lost, how many? One. Grammar tells you that. If I say the sheep are lost, more than one. Hebrew is the same way. You have to look at what the noun is partnered with to tell you if it's singular or plural. Okay, just like English. Now, if you go to the second half of the verse, so here Elohim has taken his place in the divine council. In the midst of here we have another blue column. In the midst of the Elohim, he holds judgment. Now this one has to be plural because this nasty thing called a preposition tells us that it's plural. You can't be in the midst of one. And of course, our first reaction as Christians is, oh, this must be the Trinity. Trust me, in Psalm 82, you do not want the Trinity. Because if you read the rest of the psalm, what happens to the Elohim? God says, you guys are jerks. I mean, they get blasted for being corrupt and evil. You don't want the Trinity in Psalm 82. It's really bad theology to do that. So here we have in one verse Elohim 2 times, one singular, one plural. But again, depending on the translation you're using, you may not notice that at all. Let me go back here. The other, again, we'll spend more time in Psalm 82 in week 4. But I do get a lot of pushback for this Psalm 82 business. This is sort of where I live. I'm going to really impress you now and say this was the focus of my dissertation, and it was. But this is like my favorite subject, but I get a lot of pushback on it, and I understand why. One of the things you'll hear is, well, this council, they must just be people. Then somebody will quote, Jesus in John chapter 10, not realizing that undermines his deity in the passage. Well, really it's not, because if you go over to Psalm 89, here we have, isn't this amazing? Just look at this. You go back to Psalm 82, absolutely literal. Elohim, plural. Here we have the heavenly beings. It's B'nai Elim. Elim is the plural. El, singular God, plural gods. Sons of the gods or sons of God. Right? But here we get heavenly beings. Same translation. A couple psalms over. Why? I don't know. But here we have, again, a reference to the assembly, council of the holy ones, heavenly beings. And guess where the council is? It's in the skies. So the last time I checked, human beings don't rule the cosmos or the nations in the skies. Okay.
All right. So we're looking at what he's saying, and I absolutely don't agree. So he's looking at Psalms 89, 5 through 7. So let's go bring that up. Let's look at that real quick just to critique his teaching. So he's saying that Psalm 89, 5 through 7. So this is 5. It says, the heavens will praise your wonders, O Yahweh. The heavens will praise your wonders. Your faithfulness also in the assembly of the holy ones. So God's faithfulness in the assembly of the holy ones. Okay, great. For who in the skies is comparable to the Lord? Now, these don't mean, just because it's talking about the heavens will praise your wonders, O Lord. Okay, that's a statement. That's the end of the statement. Now it's going into a different glorifying of God. Your faithfulness also in the assembly of the holy ones. Talking about his faithfulness is in the assembly of the holy ones. Who is that? It can be the angels. It can be the church. It can be Israel. It can be the prophets. It can be whoever the holy ones want to be. However God wants you to interpret that to be. It doesn't mean that they're the ones who's praising up here, that they're that all of that. It's not connected. These can be exclusive to each other. That this can be a statement and the end of the statement, then this can be a statement and the end of this statement. Your faithfulness also in the assembly of the holy ones. Period. Done. Then we go over here. For who in the skies is comparable to the Lord? Does that mean that the assembly is in the skies? Because he's asking a rhetorical question about who is comparable to God in the sky. Who is? He's not necessarily saying that the assembly is in heaven. He's saying your faithfulness is among all of your holy ones. Be there, holy ones on earth, holy ones in heaven. Your faithfulness is through all of them. It's awesome. He's like, who is like you? Who's comparable to you in the heavens? Right? It's a question. It's a question. It's actually not a question. It's praise. Because he's saying no one. He's asking a question, but the answer is the part that he's praising. No one is comparable to him in the heavens. Who among the sons of the mighty is like the Lord? Who? No one. No one. That's the answer. And that's the praise. That's the awesome part of it. And so he's not saying that all of the holy ones are the sons of the Almighty, that they're sons of the Almighty in that sense. And verse 7, and God greatly feared in the council of the holy ones, and awesome above all those who are around him. O Lord God of hosts, who is like you, O mighty Lord? He's still asking these rhetorical questions. It's not saying, look back at this. In verse in verse 6 it says, for who in the skies is comparable to the Lord? That's the end of a question. Who among, so it's another who. So for who in the skies is comparable to the Lord? That's the end of that statement. And then it says, who among the sons of the Almighty? Up here, your faithfulness also in the assembly of the holy ones. It's just not, it's not saying, this is what it's not saying. And this is what he's interpreting it though. He's saying your faithfulness also in the assembly of the holy ones, for they are in the skies. None of them are comparable to you. He's making it sound like it's two sentences intertwined, making a statement. The assembly of the holy ones are the ones who are not comparable to you. It's not that way. It's who is your faithfulness is among your holy ones, who are all of them, in heaven, in earth, everywhere. Who in the skies is comparable to the Lord? In other words, no one is comparable in the skies, in the heavens, to the Lord. No one among the sons of the mighty are like the Lord. No one is like, all of this is not one statement saying the assembly of, or the council, or the divine council is in heaven. That the skies is where this divine council resides. But that's what he's trying to say. So, and he's trying to say, look, it says council of the holy ones. So that means that This is all about the council, and it's identifying the location of the council, which is in the skies. That is not what's happening here. Okay, that's why it gets a lot of pushback, because it's not making any sense. So, sure, he wants to find a way to fool Jews into believing the doctrine of the Trinity, and this is his path, and he thinks it's a good one because he needs to make this be talking about angels so that he can infer, he can do all of this end, these dominoes he's trying to set up and drop down through manipulating what's being said. It's not insisting that the divine council is in the heavens and that the humans are somehow this divine council in the heavens. I mean, I like what he's fixing to start teaching here in a second, but if I see something I'm not going to agree with, I'm going to point it out. And this I do not agree with.
It's a reference again to the spiritual world. It's this idea that God is a heavenly host, and they work for him, and they better do what they're told, because if they don't, they're going to get punished. And it's not terribly difficult. Back to Psalm 82, here's the verse that is quoted in John 10. God says to the Elohim of his council, I said, you are gods, Elohim, sons of the Most High, all of you. Nevertheless, like men, you shall die. Again, you don't want the Trinity here. Okay, it's just not a good idea. Nevertheless, like men, you shall die and fall like any prince. Again, this is a declaration that because of your corrupt administration of what I gave you to do, ruling the nations, as we'll find out, because you did not do a good job, and part of their failure was having men allowing humans to worship them instead of the true God. We find out from Deuteronomy. Because of that, I'm going to strip you of your immortality. You see, I'm bigger than you are. I made you, not the other way around. I gave you life, and I can take it.
Okay, so this is my problem with this. So he's saying that what God is saying is that you're going to die like men because if you don't do what I say, I'm going to kill you. It's pretty much how he's characterizing God, and the issue is that the person who's saying that you will die like men, it's not because he's talking to angels saying, hey, you're going to die like men. The issue is that these human judges are being so corrupt, and they're allowing their power and their being, the chosen people of God, and just power in general corrupts absolutely sometimes. The issue is that they're so puffed up as judges that they've lost sight of the fact that they themselves are going to be judged the same way. And that they've lost their capacity to empathize with the victim or have empathy and not be too haughty with a criminal or with anyone. And that they're not bringing justice to the widows, not bringing justice to the fatherless. They're being corrupt. And the issue is that they're abusing their power and they're forgetting where they came from. They're not grounded any further. They're haughty. They're prideful. They're just like any corrupt politician. They're full of themselves. And the issue is that he's saying, God is saying, you're going to die like men. Realize that even you are like them, and that you're going to die like everyone else. Death is a great equalizer. Everyone is going to die regardless of your position or your whatever. And so this is what God is saying. Listen, you're going to die, and you need to keep that in mind, that you're not God himself. You're not invincible. Sure, you have absolute power here on earth, doing all your judges stuff and your finances and your power is great, and you feel like you're undefeatable. But realize that you're no better than any of them out, anyone else. And that's what he's saying. You're going to die like men. You're going to die like everyone else. So you need to treat people and judge rightly. Okay? And so that's what he's saying. Dr. Hieser wants to say it's the angels, and that the angels are being threatened with death. I'm going to kill you like the humans if you don't do what I say. That's not the character of God. And it's shameful that he's got to go there and make God threaten people as though that he needed to, like that's the coercion method is how God gets his angels to do stuff. That's not a powerful God if God's got to manipulate and coerce and threaten, and that's not God. That's not the way God operates. Angels, if you don't do this, I'm going to kill you. That's not even the way he did it with Adam. He said, Adam, look, you can eat from anything. I've got you the whole planet. You can eat anything. Just don't eat from this tree, because when you eat from it, you're going to surely die. Don't eat it. Do anything. I've given you everything else. Just don't eat from this tree, okay? Because you'll surely die if you eat it. He didn't say, you're going to die like the devil, Adam, if you do this. Don't you dare, because I will kill you like the devil's going to die. That's not his method. That's not the way. That's not God. God doesn't have to threaten his angels to get him to do what he wants to do. And never mind that, if angels disobeyed and were doing this, if angels were doing sinful things, God would throw them down just like he threw the devil out and his angels, his followers. He threw them right out because sin is not to be tolerated. Disobedience is sin. So essentially, he's saying that in this psalm, these angels, these holy angels, are absolutely disobeying God's word. They're doing sinful things, and they're not judging, and they're not protecting the homeless, the widow and the fatherless. And because of this fact, these angels are going to get away with this sin of disobeying God and not judging rightly. They're going to get away with this sin, and next time, I'm not going to do anything this time, but next time, I'm going to kill you like humans. So, that's not the way God was. When Adam sinned, it was like, look, you sinned, you're done. You're going to die now. He didn't say, look, next time, I'm going to let this sin slide, but next time, you're really going to die. Okay, so it's not that way. Like, God is going to allow the angels to get away with this sin first, and then he'll just think about killing them later or threatening them that way. It's just doesn't make sense. No. It's humans who are already sinful, who are acting sinful because they have sin, and he's reminding them, look, you're going to die like everybody else. Treat everybody else as equally as you want to be treated, okay? Because even you got to come before a judge, and that's me. Judge rightly. That's what he's saying. Not that God's letting the angels slide on some sins real fast. It's not what he's saying.
Now here's the passage that's sort of a springboard for what in the world Psalm 82 is talking about. Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9, and verse 43. You'll notice I have two translations here. NIV, ESV. One says sons of Israel. In fact, most of your English translations will have sons of Israel. The other one says sons of God. Now let's look at the verse. When the Most High gave the nations their inheritance, when he divided up all humankind, all mankind, when did that happen? When did the nations get divided? Tower of Babel, Genesis 11, 1 through 9. When God did that, he set up boundaries for the peoples according to the number of the sons of Israel. And here we have, according to the number of the sons of God. ESV is one of the few translations that will have this. That is the reading in the Dead Sea Scrolls. It's also the reading in the Septuagint. So the oldest manuscripts of the Hebrew Bible we have read sons of God in this passage. Now, I don't want to get into this too far. We'll do it in the fourth week. What the story is here is that God, if you remember back to the Tower of Babel episode, we get a little more detail here. God looks down, humanity is not dispersing as he had commanded them to do. He goes down, confuses their languages, and splits everybody up, and then they disperse. The chapter prior to that, Genesis 10, we have the table of nations. It gives a list, okay, of the nations that are associated with Genesis 11. What happens here is God says, okay, you don't want to listen to me. We thought that the flood would sort of take care of this, but it didn't. You don't want to listen to me. I'm not going to be your God anymore. I'm going to split you up. I'm going to put you under the authority of lesser divine beings, sons of God, who work for me. And I'm going to create a people of my own from scratch. That people was Israel. Israel does not exist at the time of the Tower of Babel because God hasn't called Abraham yet. And Israel's not listed in the table of nations for that reason. This is why it says, he divides the peoples up according to the number of the sons of God, but the Lord's portion is his people. Jacob, also known as Israel, is his allotted heritage. So this is the story of the rest of the Old Testament in a nutshell. This is the beginning of the antagonism between Israel and everybody else, and between God and other deities, other pantheons. This is the Old Testament explanation for why the other nations have their own pantheons, why they're messed up, because God punished them by abandoning them, disinheriting them. Now, we know from the very next chapter, when God calls Abram, what does God say about the nations? Does he forget them? Are they just dead meat for the rest of human history? No, he says, when he calls Abram, he says, through you, all nations of the earth will be blessed. Okay, so he hasn't forgotten them, but they are under punishment. So again, I don't want to get too far into that.
Okay, so this is this part I really, really dislike. But so he's saying that because of, just scoot back a bit. So he's saying that because of Deuteronomy chapter 32, verses 8 through 9, that it's saying that some versions say that when the Most High gave the nations an inheritance, when he divided all mankind, he set up boundaries for the people according to the number of the sons of Israel. Okay. And he's saying that, Israel doesn't exist at this time and blah, blah, blah. But first of all, you can't forget the fact that when it's being written through Moses or a scribe that is associated with Moses, that's listening to Moses or transcribing for Moses or whatever. And so it's not like the person who's writing does not know that the sons of Israel exist. And it's also doesn't mean that God doesn't know anything about Israel at this point. At the time of writing, I'm saying. And so, but let's go with the other verse. And so because it says sons of Israel in this section, he's saying it's not possible that it should be sons of Israel here. And okay. He's saying the oldest versions have sons of God here. So let's look at that. So what he does is he says that he's put borders on the people according to the number of the sons of God. And so he's saying that God, first of all, that God set up the other nations, all nations, under his sons, the sons of God, and that they're false demons or something? He's pretty much saying that when it says the sons of God here, that it's talking about that God appointed demon gods to be worshipped for those other nations to worship. What verse? Let me just give you a quiz. Pop quiz real fast. What verse is this notion violating? Anybody? Anybody? Can you think of a verse that says absolutely contrary to what he's saying? It's James. Anybody know where in James? That's my clue for you guys. Let's look at it. So it says, let no one say when he is tempted, I am being tempted by God, for God cannot be tempted by evil, and he himself does not tempt anyone. He's not going to tempt you to sin. Essentially, he's saying that God is sending false gods for other people, for the nations of the earth to worship. That's what he's saying. He's saying that that these sons of God are, I'm supposing, demons because they can't be holy. And that these demons, he's calling his sons of God. First of all, I have a problem with that. Then second of all, that he's saying that God decided to set up false gods for these nations. That's what God's going to do. That's the way God's going to treat humanity. Hey, by the way, we're going to have all these false gods. I'm going to send them false gods so they can worship false gods. Like God wants them to worship false gods. I mean, of all the things that are the preposterous ideas, this takes the cake for me. Makes no sense at all. No sense at all that God is setting up false gods for all the nations of the world. That God decided, you know what? I don't want to be over these people. I want to set up false gods over everyone, and I'm going to wait until Abraham shows up, and I'm going to go and create my own nation through them. And I'm glad that I gave those other nations a false god. False gods, all of them. Really? That's what you think? So, he's stretching, though. He's got to stretch because he's trying to find a manipulative way of bringing people from basic Jewish understanding and manipulating the divine plurality that Judaism has, and he's trying to drag them down into this watery grave of the doctrine of the Trinity, and that's his end. And so because he's trying to do something that God doesn't want done, he's got to start coming up with this crazy stuff.
So again, I don't want to get too far into that. Here are just a list of references where you get this son language. Right here, the B'nai, sons of God, B'nai Elohim, B'nai Elim, in the Old Testament. And coming back to the Shema, is all of this a violation of the Shema? Because again, we're trying to get people, again, specifically I've been highlighting the Jewish person here. over the hump of looking at their own Bible, their own Old Testament, saying it's okay to recognize divine plurality because Elohim just talks about where a being it lives and where he's from. It has nothing to do with attributes. And some of those Elohim are sons. We have this sonship language going on. It's not a violation of the Shema. I have 5 translations here of the Shema because the Shema is like the most difficult verse in the Bible to translate. You think, well, look at that. It's just a few words. What's so hard about that? In Hebrew, there are no verbs. There isn't a single verb in Deuteronomy 6:5. You have to supply it. So any one of these can work grammatically, but they all have something in common. The Lord is our God, our God, our God, our God, our God. Yahweh is our God. Now that makes sense in view of divine plurality because the Israelites believed in a whole spiritual world populated with other Elohim. And in fact, God had punished the nations, and some of those Elohim had become corrupt, and they were demanding and receiving worship from other peoples instead of the true God. And God said, look, I'm going to bring you out of Egypt, but you stay away from the other gods. You stay out of their territory, you don't intermarry with them, you stay away from them. Because he knows the threat is real. Again, it's the whole Old Testament, just in a nutshell. This is why in the Old Testament you get this sense of certain areas were owned or under the domain of different deities. This comes through in the biblical story. I've shared some of this before in other sessions we've done, but one of my favorite stories of this is, we actually just hit one in Samuel. We're going through 1 Samuel. You know when the Ark of the Covenant goes out and the Ark is captured by the Philistines and they take it back to Dagon's temple? Remember the story? And then they go in the next day and Dagon's flat in his face and his arms are hacked off and all this stuff. I love the description. But what's even better about it is when they prop him back up, you get this line in the narrative that says, and this is why to this day the priests of Dagon don't walk across the threshold. I mean, what does that mean? It's because it was Yahweh's turf. So when they go into the temple of Dagon, good morning, Dagon. I need something on the other side of the room. I'm just going to step over here and I'm going to walk around. Because in their thinking, Yahweh owns that ground because he defeated Dagon. That is holy ground to the God of Israel. Naaman the leper. Okay, he gets healed miraculously by Elisha, can't pay the prophet, and he finally gives up and says, okay, I got to go back home now. Can I have your permission? Maybe some of you remember this. What does Naaman ask Elijah to take back home with him? He wants to load 2 mules with dirt. Why would he ask for dirt? This is why he'd ask for dirt. Because he knows, he even says, now I know that the Lord, he is God. And he says, now look, I'd like to take some dirt back with me because it's part of my job. I got this king and he's old, so that I have to take him into the temple of Ramon, his god, to worship. And so he's old, I got to take him by the arm and we sort of shuffle. I always think of Tim Conway. I know I'm dating myself here, but the old tailor guy. We're going to shuffle along here. And when he bows to Dagon, I might have to go down with him because I'm hanging on to the guy. He's just old. But I'd like some dirt to take with me. Why? It's protection. Okay? I don't know if we're not told. Is he going to sprinkle some? Okay, I'm safe now. I'm in the temple of Ramon, but I got Israelite dirt with me. I got Yahweh dirt with me. Or is he just going to hold some or put it around his neck, put it in a little bag, put it in his pocket? Who knows? But to him, It's cosmic geography. This is Yahweh's territory, and I'm taking it with me. I can't live here. Got a job, got kids back home and all that stuff. I'm an important man, but I'm taking dirt with me. So what does Elisha say? Yeah, it'll work. Sure, good idea. Go ahead. Take all you can carry. We got more of that. So you get this, again, this sense that Yahweh is our God.
So let me just say right quick, those are bad analogies those are not good enough analogies of the territorial demons or demons that take care of certain areas. The best one, a better one than those ones, I don't know what he's going with there, is in Daniel, where it talks about the king, the prince of Persia, and that he was holding Gabriel back from sending the message to Daniel, and how Michael the archangel had to come and kind of move him out the way so that Gabriel can deliver the message. He was prevented for 21 days from sending the message, so it was a big deal. And so it's not a human king or a prince stopping an angel, it's a demonic power that's over Persia at that time, trying to prevent Daniel from getting an answer, or an angel entering his supposed perimeter, or his property, or his land, or his geography. And so, why are there demons that have this territorial space and stuff? It's because the devil fell, and we go back to Revelations, and it says that, that he took a third of the stars with him. I think that's Revelations 12, where a third of the stars he took with him. And so, that's talking about, the stars are talking about the angels. And so a third of all of the heavenly host followed the devil. And so you look at, since stars are being represented as the angels there, when it says that the devil and his angels, when you hear about the creation of the stars, at the same time you could possibly assume that it could also be talking about the creation of the angels. But when these angels fell with Satan, and obviously Satan fell long ago, and that's why he was tempting Eve and all of that other stuff. And so he had fallen at least before Eve was made, or after Eve was made, or during the time of Eve, because we can't say that it happened later than that. But later than Eve, the event there at the garden. And so before that, the devil fell, and he took a third of the angels then. So there's a third of the angels already with the devil when that serpent was trying to tempt Eve. So the devil wasn't a lone joker, you know what I'm saying? He wasn't a lone wolf. He had a third of the angels. So I don't even know how many numerous numbers of angels there are in heaven, but it's called a host, and it sounds like a huge number. And so if there's a ginormous number of angels in heaven, a third of those ginormous number went with the devil. And so as over time people are growing and proliferating across the earth and being fruitful and multiplying, demons take strongholds. It's not that at the time of Babylon, that the Tower of Babel, that he spread everybody out and then sent a bunch of demons to be their gods so that he could get Israel. It's not what's happening. And so he's saying, the Lord is our God, our. He's saying the significance of it being our is because they are the ones who are, that God is their God. And the other people's God is whatever. God has always intended to have everyone. The devil has always been attacking and manipulating people, but he found someone who was going to be faithful to him, and he honored him for that. Never did God say or have an intention of throwing away all of humanity and sending them under demonic gods so that he could just save Abraham, because Abraham he liked. He picked Abraham just because he wanted to start his own nation. It's not that. It's that he found one human being on the entire planet that was faithful and believed God no matter what. No matter what foolishness other people would have been like, you want to go nowheres? You don't even know where you're going. You just want to leave the house and go to a land that you think God told you to go to? Really? And Abraham's like, yeah, I'm going to do what I believe God's telling me to do, and I'm leaving. I don't care what you say. Call me a fool. I'm going. He found someone who was faithful. It wasn't that he was tossing the whole of humanity out in the trash and just looking for one guy to do this with. He only found one guy, and this guy was faithful. And he blessed him. He said, look, you have a beautiful spirit. You believe anything I tell you. You do whatever I say. I want to bless you. I want to show you some love. You know what? You're going to have children. You're going to have a son. He's going to come. All your inheritance is going to go to him. And I'm going to bless the nations. You're going to have so many children. It's going to be like the sand of the sea. It's a blessing. He's loving on Abraham. It's not because he wanted 10 or 20 or 1,000 Abrahams if he could have. He wanted the whole nation the whole planet to be full of nothing but Abrahams. But it just didn't happen. So he had one person that was this faithful, and he said, I'm going to pick you. You're so faithful. I'm going to bless you. That's why. And he said, you're the guy. You're the guy. I'm going to pick you, and because you are so faithful, and I'm going to bless you, and I'm going to bless your family, and I'm going to bring the promise, the salvation of this entire planet. It's going to come through you. The nations of the world are going to be blessed through you because you're the guy. I appreciate you. I love you, and I am going to honor your honor of me. And that's what happened. It's not that God said, you know what, I don't care about these other nations. Let's give them some fake gods. Let's give them some demonic gods, and, I tempt them, it's whatever. They're trash anyways. I'm waiting for Abraham. I'm going to pick this guy. That's not the way it went. God's not forcing people to do whatever. He knows what's going to happen. He lets them choose their free will, and he gets one guy who's faithful, and he blesses that guy immensely. And that's what happened. It's not that God gave the whole world over to some demons for them to worship because he is tempting them and saying, hey, look here. Here's God. Here's a God for you. You follow them, and you guys go to hell. I'm going to wait for Abraham. That's not God.
This is what the Shema means. The Shema is not a denial of all this other stuff we've looked at. There's a context for it. And it's just not one we're used to. And you might be thinking, what about statements like, there's none beside me, none like me? They're not denials of the existence of other Elohim. They're statements of Yahweh's incomparability. I'll just point out, some of these denials are in Deuteronomy 32, verse 39. They're in Deuteronomy 4, which is the parallel. Deuteronomy 4, 19 and 20 is the parallel to Deuteronomy 32, 8 and 9. You get two denial statements in Deuteronomy 4, verses 35 and 39. Well, what's going on there? Deuteronomy 32 said the demons are gods, and they must be real because we can't deny the demons are real. And now you got this none beside me stuff. What's going on? I'm so confused. Well, if you think of them as statements of incomparability, there actually is no problem. Now, here's a list of places, and I want to focus in on these two. These are all denial statements, and their formula, if you can read a little Hebrew. Right down here, the city of Babylon says, there is none beside me, there is none like me. And over here in Zephaniah, it's Nineveh that says that. Exactly the same phrases, a couple of these phrases over here, that are in the denial statements. Now here's the question. Is Babylon really saying, hey, I just want everybody to know that there are no other cities in the world? Just me. No, that's absurd. All you got to do is travel a couple miles and you run into one. The whole point is that Babylon is saying, I'm the best. None can compare to me. And that's what the denial statements are about. So by way of ending...
Okay, so before we listen to this summary and application, this is an Arian argument. This is an Arian argument. This is an argument that I make all the time. That when I talk to Trinitarians and they say, look, it says that besides me there is no other God, and you're saying that Jesus is a God because he's called God in the Bible, but he's not the only true God, so therefore you're having two gods, and I have a problem with that because that's not Trinitarianism. That's not monotheism. Well, no, it's not monotheism, it's monolatry. You got that right. But it is not a violation of the fact that there's only one true God. And so the way he explained it is he's saying, look, there's statements that are out there that in the Bible where it talks about they're saying that they are the only one. There's none like him. There's no city like this one. And he's saying, it's not saying that it's the only city in existence. It's saying there's nothing like me. There's no city like me. And so the point is that that's the way God is saying. There's no God besides me. And so that he's saying there's nothing equal to me. Yeah, sure, there are other things called God, but they're not me. They're not the God. They're not the awesome, almighty, whatever, King of all, God, cause of all, maker of all things. So that's the argument. That's an Arian argument for why Jesus is a God and why he's the only born God and why he is called, the Word was God and all of that. But he's not that one God who is the true God, right? That's why Jesus, who is a God, who is called God, says that the Father is the only true God. Because there's no one comparable to the Father. He's different. He's uncreated. He's always existent. Jesus came into existence. He's one of the creatures. He's one of the things that are made, but he's not like any of the things that are made. He's different. He's a literal child of God, but he is come into existence by will of the Father. And so it's important to understand that what this guy is doing, this scholar, is teaching Arianism. He's teaching Arianism. It's Arianism, and he's trying to pretend like these are reasons why there's a Jewish Trinity. But there is not a Jewish Trinity. He's just proving Arianism. That's it. And so he does a really good job, better than me, at proving Arianism. But my point is that as we move along here, you're going to see that these are arguments that Arians make. And people say, oh, those are not valid arguments because you're Arians and you don't understand the Trinity and blah, blah. Look at this guy. He's a Trinitarian, but yet he sees what we see. Okay? I don't know if he's a closet Arian or something like that, but the point is that what he's teaching is Arianism. He has not said they're consubstantial, hasn't proven consubstantiality. So to a Jew who is following this line of thinking and is listening to Michael Hieser, Dr. Hieser say these things and teach these things, all they're getting at this point is that there's no God like the Father or the Yahweh, but Jesus can be called God in a different sense, kind of like the rest of these other divine council, other gods that are out there. But he's not that Yahweh. So that's Arianism. It's exactly Arianism. So let's listen to the rest of this and then we'll shut it down.
Summary. A couple of thoughts to take away. We have this list here. Again, the Shema not being a contradiction to divine plurality, affirming the uniqueness of Yahweh. Divine plurality is not inconsistent with monotheism, and it paves the way for the next step, which is next week, of explaining how Christianity grew out of Judaism. Now, we're going to see next week that the Old Testament identifies one particular Elohim as Yahweh, along with Yahweh. I'm going to show you passages where you have God and this other figure in the same passage, and they're indistinguishable. And there are some things that you sort of miss in the English translation that are pretty dramatic. To sort of telegraph that, what you have in the Old Testament is you have Yahweh invisible and Yahweh visible, and sometimes they're in the same scene. And sometimes the visible one is the Yahweh you think of, other times the visible one is the other Yahweh. And you say, well, that's confusing. There's like two Yahwehs and one is but isn't Yahweh. And yeah, that's exactly the way we talk about Jesus, if you think about it.
So, I'm telling you, this is absolutely Arian. It's so amazing because Jesus is called Yahweh because Jesus is given the name. He comes in the name of the Father. The Father, he's given the name above all names. What name is that? That's Yahweh. And so, and I've said this before, that sometimes when somebody says, it's this passage is talking about Yahweh, and he's saying that he's going to, talk about, the one, that they pierced and blah, 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 and all of that in the Old Testament. And this is talking about Yahweh. Which Yahweh is the question? I can say that now because you can hear a scholar saying the same thing. The Jews believed that there was a lesser Yahweh, the Metatron, or the lesser Yahweh, because they believed that there was two Yahwehs. The true Yahweh and the messenger of Yahweh, the representative of Yahweh, that God is invisible. No one has ever seen him. Several times Moses has been told, you've never seen God, you can't see God and live, and yet he sees something. God is invisible. John chapter 1 verse 18, no one has seen God at any time. The only born God, who's Jesus, has been revealing him. So if you thought you saw God, who'd you see? You didn't see the invisible God, because you can't see him. You can see the image of the invisible God, though, and that's Jesus in the Old Testament. And so sometimes it's the invisible one or something. The invisible one is always the Father, and that's the true God. No one sees him. No, you can't be in his face. You can't see him because you would die. The earth would die. The sun would die. All of creation would die. That's why Jesus is so vitally important, because he's the mediator. Because we're not worthy to be in God's presence like that. That's the point. That's why he needs Jesus to communicate with us, because we can't be in God's presence. We can deal with that. So the point is that there's two Yahwehs, because you have the representative of Yahweh, and then you have the real Yahweh, the invisible one that no one's ever seen. So, it ties into when you've seen me, you've seen the Father. Does that mean that Jesus is the Father, that he's the same person? No, he's the picture of God, the image of God. He's the image of the invisible God. So if he's visible, he's not the invisible God. He's the image of, he's the picture of God. He's the picture given to us of God. And so if we think we're going to see God, we have to look at Jesus, because there's nothing else to look at. God is literally invisible. You cannot see him at all. So you can't see God, but you can see Jesus, because Jesus is the image of God. God made himself an image so that we had something to see. God has not always had an image. He's invisible. He created Jesus as his image, maintaining his invisibility. I mean, it's mind-boggling. But he's teaching Arianism. He's not teaching that they're consubstantial. He's saying they're indistinguishable. They are distinguishable because he's going to point them out. And what is that? That's not Trinitarianism. It's Arianism. Because you're never going to get them to be together one. And that's the point. When he goes through this 3 hours worth, we're almost to 1 hour at this video. The next 2.5 hours are all scriptures talking about Arianism in the most profound way, guys. He's proving Arianism, and you guys got to be taking notes, because this, I've learned this on my own. He's fixing to give it to you in one shot. It's absolutely vital that you understand this. But I'm going to cut it. I'll let him babble on a little bit, and then we'll finish.
Jesus is God, but he isn't. He's God, but he's not the Father. Again, the Old Testament has those categories already in it. Okay? They were tracking mentally with the idea of two. And we'll get to three as well. But they're tracking on two. On the one hand, it's an easy shift to accept for a Jew intellectually, to accept the idea, okay, we got Yahweh and we got this other Yahweh, okay, I know what you're talking about. But the other time it was a life-altering, life-threatening decision to turn your back on Judaism and become one of these Christian people. Because you had to believe that Jesus was the second one, the co-equal second person. That was a huge step. But they had the categories already in their head. Now, I wanted to make a few comments about scholars. The next time you see a TLC special or a PBS special or a Nova special, whatever, fill in the blank, BBC, and they talk about how, this New Testament stuff, I just think they were making that up. Or the early Christians wouldn't even have known what they were talking about, this Jesus is God business, and Paul made that up. And then Paul and the early church, they were actually disagreed on their theology. Next time you hear about that, just kind of smile to yourself and say, you're just not too bright. Okay? You don't know your Old Testament context for the New Testament very well, Dr. So-and-so, do you? Because you don't. You don't. You either have to be ignorant of it or you just have to deceive your audience and not give it to them. And that's usually what's going on. I think we've hit this before. Last point, again, this is but isn't Yahweh thinking. Again, that's what I want you to sort of be tracking on for next time. So, a teaser. Last slide. I'm not, some of you will know this because you've heard me bring this up before. Others, this will be new to you. There's something odd about these two verses. Don't guess now, because I'm not going to tell you if you're right. The first one is a little easier than the second one. There's something odd that's going on in these two verses, and I'll be referencing those next week when we hit the two powers idea. I don't have any...
Okay, we're going to kill it right there. 52 minutes and 38 seconds of his lecture. We will talk about this next time. Hope you guys have a great week or a couple days. I may pop another video out here in the next 5 minutes. I don't know, but you guys have a good one. This is going to be an interesting ride, I promise.